enjoyed our chat. I told you moving on.
Hello. Hi everyone, come on in.
Yeah.
Where did I just speak up? Just for you.
Those are more people on the street. I know, we need to like hand out.
All right. Hello everyone. My name is Luke Butler and I work for Comcast Live Labs. And we're joined here by a group of founders and investors who are both new to Philadelphia or have built businesses in other places to talk about the outsider perspective on Philadelphia. What's Philadelphia to a newcomer? I moved to Philadelphia from London 12 and a half years ago for a 2.5-year graduate school program. And just fell in love with the city and ended up staying much longer than I planned to. And I think that the perception that outsiders have about Philadelphia is often very different than what Philadelphians have. And I think that Amplify Philly and this initiative is really an unabashed expression of pride in Philadelphia by Philadelphians, which is unusual for a city that had a marketing slogan which was "Philadelphia isn't as bad as Philadelphians say it is." So it's a nice transition over the years. And so wanted to talk to all of you about your impressions. And Tyler, I'll start with you. You moved here during last summer for the Live Labs Accelerator, moved here from LA. Give me one kind of interaction or moment in your time in Philadelphia that summed up kind of what you think Philadelphia is about, your impressions of Philadelphia.
Yeah, so, I think probably we went, we had this cocktail mixer in the very beginning of the program, and Daniela introduced me to one of her friends who invited me down to the Bach, the building where it's like a lot of makers and artisans and whatnot. And so I took her up on that and went to check it out. And she introduced me to a bunch of her friends who like all proceeded to show me around the space, like a group of four of us walking around. And like introduced us to other people in the space, showed us what they're working on. It was like a very welcoming tour that we got of the space, and then there's a bar up top. We went and had some drinks all together. It was like I immediately had 5 new friends. Yeah.
And when you knew that you were coming to participate in the accelerator, you knew you were going to move to Philadelphia. What did you know about Philadelphia at that point? What was your impression of the city?
Yeah, my impression of Philadelphia was very like hard knock, blue collar, like Philly cheesesteak. I mean, we're kind of like all I knew. Like that's what I assumed Philadelphia was all about. And very surprised to find otherwise. A lot of veganism out there.
Vegan cheesesteaks?
Yeah, well, I don't know about that.
I've had one, they're pretty good.
Right. But also like very welcoming people overall. Like the community in Philadelphia is super strong. And that was like an awesome thing to get to be a part of as well.
Eve, you had a little further to travel to get to Philadelphia. Talk about the journey of you and your co-founder Carol and how you ended up in the city to start Chancy.
Yeah, so actually it took moving about 5,000 miles away to meet my co-founder Carolyn. So the two of us, we had decided to study abroad. We had decided to study abroad in China, or to teach abroad. So the two of us ended up in the same village, teaching at rival elementary schools. So we spent 2 years there, and we like to joke a lot that it was a very resource limited environment, and from that comes a lot of creativity. And kind of while spending time in China, we had our own experiences of trying to buy things online and having to return them. So it took us, we had that idea, we wanted to run with it, and we moved back to Philadelphia and moved in with Carolyn's parents in Old City, and spent a good 9 months there and really loved the whole energy of the city. Had enough of a reason to stay there and work on Gen Z there.
Yeah. And as a founder, talk about an aspect of Philadelphia or the community here that's had an impact on Gen Z that you think maybe wouldn't have existed in another place.
Yeah, I would say Philly has this really awesome network. It's kind of a very big town, or has that kind of town feel that you maybe don't get in another city. But since Carol and I were both new to the community, we really wanted to do something to get to know other founders and other people working in the startup community. So we, I think in July of 2017, we moved into a WeWork space and had heard a lot of great things about the co-working space. And in that first year that we were working on Gen Z, Carol and I were always out beta testing. We were at parks, daycares, other co-working spaces, getting people to use the app. And it was at one of these beta tests that we started talking to this guy, Sal, and he had a lot of great feedback, and we started talking to him more, and it came to light that two things. He has an 8-year-old, so he's been through that traumatic experience of buying kids' shoes, but he also was a user experience designer and had a lot of really awesome knowledge that he could share with us. So we started working with Sal, and him having worked in Philadelphia for 15 years working with designers and developers, he introduced us to our current CTO, Dan. So it was that really tight network of being able to do these beta tests, meet somebody like Sal, who then opened our network, and now we have an awesome design and development team through that.
John, it's probably easier to list the cities that you haven't worked in and invested in than the ones you have, because you've worked all over the world, invested in companies all around America. From seeing all of these different startup and tech communities, what's unique about Philadelphia? What's Philadelphia's unfair advantage, would you say, compared to all of these other places?
I think Philly has several. So in the number of universities there is, and the talent that comes out of those universities is stellar, both on the technical side, also on the business side, obviously with Wharton. And I think the city itself is an asset. It's really, I think, underpriced in terms of real estate, which is a good thing, especially if you buy property there, or if you need to buy an office building, or if you just think about it from the talent's perspective. Where would they like to live that it's not costing them more money, right? Like, you might be doing fine, as a CEO of a company in San Francisco, but it doesn't mean your staff is quite getting by, and that is a loss, right, of talent. And so I think of all the companies that I've been involved in, hiring in Philly, contrary to what I hear, has always been more or less smooth sailing for the things that I've done and the things that I've worked on. And I think it's got a healthy pipeline of people who are interested in being part of the startup world.
And when you're out in these different cities, whether it's Atlanta or other places, and you talk about being from Philadelphia, what are other people's impressions? What do they seem to know about Philly? Has that changed over the time that you've been doing business?
It's still pretty, I would say Philly has some branding still working on.
You mean gritty isn't enough?
Right.
There's more?
Right, yeah. As soon as I said from Philly, people are like, oh, so you want to fight? It's like, no, I'm not good at that. I'm good at tech.
You look like you'd be pretty good at that. You can handle yourself.
But that is part of, I think, the mission of companies emerging from the city is to help rebrand the city. I think the city, over the past 10 years, has done a really good job of supporting its export creative class. It's all represented here. You've got the Film Commission downstairs. You've got Lift Labs, and essentially a corporate investor inviting talent to the city. And then you've got people like me who do our small part investing in the talent that's there where we can. And so I think when I first moved to Philly 7 years ago, most of those things weren't in place.
Steve, as a fast-growing business, you obviously need capital to grow your company. What's the experience of raising capital in Philadelphia? I mean, people talk a lot about, you hear two different things. One, there's not enough venture capital in Philadelphia, and two, venture capital has changed, is more mobile, and it will find the companies. What's been your experience, and what are the challenges of doing that in Philadelphia?
Yeah, we, so back in September, so about 6 months ago, Gail and I went out to raise our first round of outside investment, raising a seed round. And something that we, when pitching our startup, we're really kind of the intersection of retail and technology. And something that we just find is that that's not a lot of the focus of the investors in the Philly area. There's a little bit more focus on life sciences, pharmaceutical. And so, talking about retail is kind of just a different area of focus for them. So we've spent a lot of time going back and forth to New York, finding more consumer investors, getting to know that community. And that's been a really big plus, though, of being in Philadelphia, is it is so close to New York that if there's something in Philly that you can't find, you can go to New York. But I think, in terms of, I think Philly has a lot of great things to offer, like John mentioned, of being really a sustainable place to start a business. It's low cost. You can find great talent. You can find, office space to expand quickly. So I'll be really excited to see over the years, do we see more diversity in investors, who they are, what they're investing in. But, in the meantime, there are other cities to tap into that can really help you grow in a sustainable way.
John, what's your perspective on this? Does Philadelphia have any unique challenges that any city other than, or any area other than Silicon Valley, New York, or Boston doesn't have? Is there any? Is Philadelphia in the same boat as the vast majority of other places?
Well, it actually has one that's not subjective at all. That's the city tax, right? Like it's like very expensive to run a business in the city of Philadelphia. It's cheaper to go out to the suburbs to I don't know, to the various suburbs outside the city, and I think that has scared away a lot of business, and it makes the first impulse for people who are really focused on costs. I mean, yeah, you're saving a lot, but like when it comes tax time, you start to really rethink your choice of where you are. That's unfortunate.
Well, and I think there are some folks here from the Commerce Department,
sorry,
who are just crying in the back. But they can talk about some of the incentives that are in place, particularly for early stage companies that don't require them to pay business tax as they're growing and support them as they hire. So I think they're making steps in the right direction, but it is more expensive in a major city than in the suburbs. Tyler, switching gears a little bit, you're building a gaming company and grew up in a gaming family and part of a strong community in Los Angeles. Talk about your interactions, your experience of the gaming community in Philadelphia, how that's changing, what your impressions are related to other places, and tell us a little bit about Polycade.
Yeah. So in our time at Philly, we got to go and visit 2 different indie dev shops. And I mean, easily the first thing that we noticed was how awesome their offices were, which like indie devs in LA work from home because they can't afford an office. So like just the space and community that these devs have created is really cool. It's like a great just gaming think tank. And unfortunately we were so busy with the program, we didn't get to go to any of their meetups that they do in Old City at bars and whatnot, which I would love to see. But so it feels like those indie devs get more chance to focus on their games and like build great content, whereas in LA it's such a rat race that it's easy to get lost in the shuffle.
And talk a little bit about Polycade. What is it that you and your co-founder Jake are building?
Yeah, so we're building a connected arcade platform for social gaming. And so this basically brings gaming into social spaces like bars and restaurants. It's a fantastic.
This one.
Yes, there's one downstairs. Gotta check it out and play it. A little old version of the software on there, but we'll update it. But so it's also like a great platform for discoverability. You know, our focus is quality first. And so there's so much great content that a lot of these indie devs and otherwise are creating that is lost in the shuffle. And especially with gaming having gone in this direction of very hardcore gaming communities, most of us have decided that we are not gamers. But if you ask people, you know, are you a gamer? They'll say no. And then if you ask them, how often do you play games? They say, every day. And so there's a disconnect. We're missing the easy access stuff that we grew up with.
And if anyone here plays the unit downstairs and enjoys it, Polygate is giving away a unit to anyone that signs up for the Lift Labs newsletter. So if you sign up, you'll go into a draw and have the chance of winning one, which if you were to buy, it's not cheap.
Yeah. And actually there's a special reward tier for being here in this exact location, and so you have a much higher chance of winning. So check out our Instagram, you can find the link in there.
Eve, one of the things that we've started at Lift Labs in the last few weeks in our space in the Comcast Technology Center is a meetup for female founders and female investors. And the idea is that it provides a space for folks to ask questions that they maybe wouldn't want to ask in an investor meeting, and meet peers who are building companies or looking to invest. Talk a little bit about, as you know, you and your co-founder Carolyn, female founders building the company in Philadelphia. Talk a little bit about the network and the community. What exists, what still needs to be there to help support female founders in Philly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, getting into the Philly community, we've seen that there's not only a strong network of founders, female founders, but also, you know, female investors, female in the C-suite, people that are females just involved in the startup space in general, and that forming a really tight-knit community. You know, when we first went out to start raising money, I kind of joke because if you're a female raising money in Philly, there's one person you need to know, and that's Ellen Weber. And she might actually be here today around South by Southwest, but as soon as you say you're raising money and if you're a female founder, they introduce you to Ellen. So we got introduced to Ellen back in September, and she was great because, you know, she gave us kind of a pulse on the investing community in Philly, but she also introduced us to other, you know, investors and things that we should be going to. And over the past 6 months, I think kind of a funny moment was there was the event with the female founders and funders going on, and 3 to 4 of our mentors had pinged me saying, hey, are you going to this event? You should go to it. I think it would be beneficial. So it was kind of that moment of just how many people's radars we were on and them thinking about us and where we should be, that very cool moment of that network and how integrated it is.
And you graduated from the Philly Startup Leaders Accelerator last year. How, compared to some of the other places that you've been, what do you see? What do you think of the quality of the programming for startups in Philadelphia? And are there things you've seen in other places that you think we would benefit from here?
Yeah, so Carolyn and I, you know, being new to the community, we had heard about Philly Startups Leaders Accelerator and thought it would be a great opportunity to really get to know Philly and who's in Philly, who's the movers and shakers. So we joined that, we joined that last January of 2018. And really, I think the program itself is about bringing in lectures, having mentors, and really getting you integrated and connected with the Philly community. So there are programs out there, that are a little bit more intensive with, all day, every day programming that maybe are 6 weeks or 6 months of very intensive training. But the PSL Accelerator is much more about getting you to know and get connected with everyone you need to know in Philly. So, once they make those connections, it's really up to you what sort of experience you want to have. Anthony Bucci from Roadzilla came in, he gave a talk, he knows a ton about operations. We've been thinking about what our warehouse would look like or any of those decisions. So we connected with him, we went out, he gave us the whole tour of the warehouse. And I think, stepping back, you get connected with these awesome people, and it's just up to you to, hey, what sort of learning experiences do you want to have, and go out and make that happen. And that's been a big plus for us, of just knowing all those people.
John, when people come to you and they're looking to get connected into the Philly ecosystem and get advice on building their company, who are the people that you send them to? Who do you think are the really strong founders and investors that want to give back and want to mentor and help people grow in Philly? Who should people be looking to meet with?
Yeah, well, definitely
John Garcia.
Definitely not me, but the resource that I'm proud to be a part of is Philly Startup Leaders. I think as an organization, it does a really good job of doing just that, like laying bare the resources that are in town, and then providing the connection to those resources. And that's through collective effort. Everyone at the organization, within the organization, people like Bob Moore and Kiera are doing a great job of playing that role for entrepreneurs. You're sort of alum of one of our programs, so it's exciting to see the results of that work. Outside of that, Scott over at Ben Franklin Technology Partners, Scott Nissenbaum, and there's so many. I feel like I'm leaving so many out, but PSL is a great place to connect to them all.
Tyler, you had 3 months here and then left to go back home to LA. Putting aside the kind of the family, personal element of it, what would have kept you in Philadelphia? Why aren't you building Polygate in Philadelphia? What could we add that would have got you and Jake to move here full time?
I think it probably would have been a good move to spend more time with my wife and get her on board, because it's a little more about that, honestly. Having been back in LA for like 4 or 5 months now, the longer it goes, the more I'm like, that was really nice. I'd kind of like to go back to Philly. But yeah.
You got to work on your wife.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a little more about that. Because we actually considered it very strongly to stay in Philly for a minute. Part of the tax breaks, just the cost of space, and not to mention the office at Comcast, as well as we got to meet a lot of other folks running businesses there, and it was awesome to hear that the turnover is so small. So once you hire folks, they pretty much stay on board. And so it seemed, and then the proximity to New York, it just feels like kind of the best of all worlds. And so, having gotten to experience it, and knowing cities like Austin and Portland who had this massive influx of people, I feel like Philly and maybe Atlanta are next.
Do we have any questions from the audience, folks? We have a lot of founders and community members here. Any other thoughts on what makes Philadelphia stand out? Any questions? All right, I'll ask one more and we'll wrap up. So we talked a lot about the tech community, but I think the thing that stands out for me is Philly is a very easy city to live in. The quality of life is very high. It's a very livable city. For you, Tyler, spending some time here and even moving back. Hello. Oh, okay. And John as a native. If you were making recommendations for people to come to Philly, where to eat, what to do, where to hang out, from your new perspective, what would you tell people?
Well, definitely get your reservation for Zahav months in advance, because it's absolutely worth it. It's amazing, we lived right in the center of the city, over by where kind of the hospitals and whatnot. which was awesome because we had very easy access to all parts of the city. So we really got to explore the entire city and like revisit those places, even though we were working 17-hour days.
Eve, where do you send people?
Philly's a little bit like the blast from the past, so make sure you grab cash. And then I would tell you go down to the Italian market, grab some tacos, barbacoa. Although I am from Texas, so you're probably going to have a lot of tacos this weekend. But then go over to some of the dive bars that are like in the neighborhood. There's some awesome places that have great live music. Again, make sure you have cash on hand. The bartenders will not take your card. But it's always a great time over there.
John, what about you?
So I used to live in Chinatown, and the food over there is amazing. So that whole area for food, but for professional contacts and just like socializing with the business community. Of course, there's 1776, but I really like the pipeline space, and particularly for its location. It's just right in the middle of everything, and so it's really easy to just hang out there and then just go off and do your other meetings.
All right.
I'll add in there the soup dumplings at Tom's.
All right, Tyler, Eve, John, thank you so much. Thank you for building your companies in Philadelphia, spending some time with us in Philly. It's good to know that the door's not shut. We still got a chance to get you there. All right, thanks everyone.
front, and Millie on crew. We have a great, great panel, so thank you all for being here. Good afternoon. So my name is Bridget Daniel, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Local Electronic Systems and part of the Amplify Philly initiative. And this is Who Got the Jazz? How East Coast cities are leveraging diversity to attract big tech and drive economic development. And this is probably one of the most just insightful experts that I've ever had the opportunity to ever moderate. So that's not to be a sycophant, that's just, I'm so glad that you all came and joined this really needed discussion that I just want to put some quick context around, and then we're going to pitch it into the group. But because we're at South by, and I think we should pay homage to what this, this event is, who got the jazz? Who knows who Tribe Called Quest is in the crowd? Tribe Called Quest. Yes, yes. So Tribe Called Quest is a hip-hop group, one of the arguably I think one of the best hip-hop groups come out of the East Coast, New York City. They have a song called Who Got the Jazz? And I think that was also a time when they made that song in the early 90s, like 92, 93. People know what 92, 93 represents for hip-hop, probably one of the best eras of hip-hop, because it was a time when we had gotten past the 80s, we were gotten past like, what is it? And we were now trying to drive and own that culture, own what that was as a people and the craft. So much creativity was coming out that time. And it was somewhat divided by coasts, but it was just still people creating. We had that East Coast, West Coast. You had like Biggie, and you had Nas, and you had, like Wu-Tang in the East Coast. And then the West Coast, you had Dr. Dre, and you had Snoop, and you had Ice Cube. Just definitely all good music, but different because of the culture, and different because of the coast. So I just look at that as a golden time. And what I loved about using that concept is when we're talking about tech, it's such a golden time that we're also still trying to drive identity and drive our culture and establish value for people of all representations being in tech, just like they did in hip hop, just like they did in the 90s. So when I look at this topic, I just wanted to frame it because I think it's a good time to start celebrating that we are a coast of East Coast cities that have such a great specialness that really is driven by the ultimate concentration of diversity anywhere in the globe. You have it on the East Coast, that 95 corridor. And the fact that we could do more with it and value it, I think that's what the topic of this conversation is. So we have a lot of great speakers who represent different stakeholders, because there's a lot of momentum coming around the globe around building diversity and technology and innovation. But they all represent so many different aspects. So I'm gonna start with Young Mu, because an inspiration of this was also around the concept of inclusive prosperity, which is what we're trying to drive and create. But Young Mu has a great opportunity to really talk about it because of his academia, where he's representing for Drexel University. And of course, we have municipalities like DC, and of course, we have companies like Comcast all driving what that concept means. But Young Mu, I'd love you to start off, share what that means to Drexel and yourself, and then talk about how you even got into that space. And if you all could just take the same introductory turn of events, I think that would be great, just to introduce the crowd to what this is.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, thank you so much, Bridget, for putting this panel together. It's an honor to be up here with such a distinguished panel. My name is Young Mu Kim. I direct something called the Excite Center at Drexel University, but I have the privilege of working with our president, John Fry, who, when he came to Drexel 9 years ago, came to us with a vision of being the most civically engaged university in the country, right? And we didn't know what that really meant at the time, but what it, let's face it, oftentimes universities do not have great relationships with their cities and their communities. Drexel in particular, it had somewhat of a contentious relationship with its community. So he wanted to turn that completely around, because he realized, and again, more and more of us realize, that as the city goes, our university will go as well. We're not an island, we're not a place that has a wall around it, like another place, Columbia. We are, we're part of the city, and and it just makes no sense for us not to take some strong role in that destiny. So his first, our first sort of stake in the ground on this was a community center that we established in West Philadelphia. This is a federally designated promise zone. So it's an area that faced persistent challenges due to poverty and low high school and academic graduation rates. So we established first a university extension center. We think it's the first private university extension center established in the country, where we offer services like legal aid, financial counseling, health and wellness training to the community for free, and it's all staffed by university personnel. The most recent, and where we really get to the inclusive prosperity, is we're taking that concept to a very large development that's happening on our campus. This is a development called Schuylkill Yards. And it's university property, but it's actually a private developer who's going to be developing it. And what we've tried to do is, in pursuing this project, we really only have a certain amount of leverage on this, right? We have the land. Once you sign the paper, you kind of lose your ability to, or some ability to dictate what's going to happen afterwards. So in pursuing this agreement, we really wanted to find a developer who shared our values about inclusive prosperity. So we have a shared values agreement with the developer, Brandywine Realty Trust, that the economic benefits that we're trying to build through these, new towers, new places for tech companies, new startups, innovation to take hold, to also have economic returns for the local community. There will be jobs, there will be procurement, there will be training pathways, there will be an integrated neighborhood education program that we're also spearheading. So, sorry, that was way too much. But
and ambitious.
It is very ambitious. It's very ambitious, but we're trying to do it.
But we love the intention.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So yeah, Deputy Mayor Brian. Can I just say, so we met Deputy Mayor Brian Kenner last year, and they came by. WeDC, who was in the house. Thank you, WeDC, for being here. Amplify Village. We met Brian last year, and Rick Nucci and I just started talking to him, and all of a sudden we were like, that's just this thing next year. The fact that it's actually happening says so much. So thank you for the commitment, and would love to just hear what your thoughts are on this.
Thank you very much, Bridget. Again, I will start just by saying thank you to Amplify Philly. I think it is very encouraging when we see not just one city out here, but lots of cities, because I think that it takes cities, frankly, to make a difference. And I think that many of the issues that you all have been talking about in your space are very similar to the issues that we have in Washington, D.C. So we feel that, and thank you again for all that you do. I'm Brian Kenner. I'm the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development in Washington, D.C. What does that mean? What that means is that I've got a few responsibilities. I've got to make sure that Washington, D.C. residents get jobs, right? Everybody knows that in order to really make a difference, employment is very important. Second, I've got to make sure that I'm increasing tax revenue in the District of Columbia. Why would I want to increase tax revenue? Because that's what pays for the important police, health, education investments that cities make. And finally, I've got to care about affordable housing. Affordable housing is becoming the de jour issue in cities, especially as people move back into cities. Companies are really looking, sports teams, everybody's looking for that urban environment, which means that amenity-rich places like cities have higher costs for people to live, and so I've got to be focused on that. We in Washington, D.C., we've sort of thought of, the last couple of years, we've been thinking about how do we make sure, A, that people know about what we do in Washington, D.C., but almost more importantly, how do they know what our values are? How do they know what makes sense and what's really important in Washington? And so for us, we've really tried to stamp this hard. Frankly, the first place we did it was South by Southwest a few years ago. And so our house opens up, the WeDC house opens up later on this evening. Everybody's welcome to come. It's on Rainey Street. But what you'll see there is that we want to be known as the capital of inclusive innovation. We want, whether you are a person of color, LGBTQ, whether you're a woman, whether you're disabled, we want you to feel comfortable in Washington, D.C. We already know, Smart Assets, I think for the 5th year in a row, has said that Washington, D.C. is the #1 city in the country for female entrepreneurs. That deserves applause.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
We already know we're one of the best places in the country for people of color entrepreneurs. And so, what we've been thinking about the last few years is how do we continue that momentum and how do we build on that? We did a report a few years ago called an Inclusive Innovation Report. That report showed us some recommendations and things that we wanted to do, and so we started to actually do them. We made an investment in an inclusive innovation incubator, which is located very close to Howard University. It's been open for about a year and a half. And we wanted to do that because we wanted to sort of help that ecosystem. We wanted for people to feel comfortable in a space in Washington, D.C. We further invested in a sort of umbrella organization for female entrepreneurs called the Beacon Initiative in Washington, D.C. They have been, I think, a great asset in Washington, D.C., funding other projects, the Veneto Project, and other female-led entrepreneurial efforts. And then finally, most recently, we recently seeded a new inclusive innovation fund. That fund, which we think at full sort of funding capacity will be about $20 or so million, and its purpose is really to look at companies by underrepresented entrepreneurs. We know that once you get past that friends and family, and frankly, even in the friends and family round, that is where we're losing lots of people. Great ideas, great traction, great interest, and still not able to sort of make that next step. And so we wanted a fund that was going to be better able to be helpful around that. And so for us, this is not just something that we're talking about. It's not just a brand, but we want for people to feel it. And we know that we've got to commit resources. We've got to take policy steps. And frankly, we've got to be here with Philly talking about it in order to make it happen.
Thank you. Erin Horn-McKinney, thank you so much. I've known Erin for years, and we're like policy geeks, but she has this great new role that I think we just awesome to hear about. So Erin, definitely tell us what you're doing now and what you think about this proposal.
Thank you. So thank you so much to you and to Billy for having us, and for all the fellow panelists, because this is a really great lineup that you have, and a topic that I'm so excited about. I am in Cleveland, Ohio at a venture firm and economic development firm called Jumpstart. Jumpstart has 3 tech funds. One specifically is a $10 million fund specifically for women and minority tech entrepreneurs based in Ohio. And we give investments of about $250K all the way up to $750K to those entrepreneurs. We also do that in partnership with a number of other organizations across the state, because one of the best kept secrets about Ohio that people don't know is that, well, several things. One is that it is, when you look at different states and their ecosystems, most of them have about 1 to 3 cities in that state that have strong entrepreneurial ecosystems. Ohio has at a minimum 6, right? So we have Cincinnati, Columbus, Cleveland, Dayton, Toledo, and Akron, who all the state has been investing in for almost 30 years with funding specifically for entrepreneurs, and more specifically for tech entrepreneurs with the Ohio Third Frontier. So there's a lot of funding that people don't realize. And when you combine that with the low cost of living in Ohio, that makes for the low cost of doing business. So one of the things that, in addition to my work at Jumpstart, where I'm their first managing partner that they've ever had for inclusion, specifically leading strategy externally to create additional programming and funding opportunities. Right now we have an access to capital project that we have created, that we're doing research around how to really invest and fund and help entrepreneurs in that friends and family round that you've talked about. And also related to the affordable housing piece, one of the things separately that I'm doing along with my husband, Jacoby over there, so you can wave your hand, we separately are working on a project called the Utopia Incubator, which is going to be the first of its kind in the country, which is a residential tech incubator, 24-month program that provides free housing, free healthcare, gives $100K to entrepreneurs as they meet milestones, and has built into it follow-on funding as well as a living stipend. And that additionally gives them an opportunity to go for that funding, whether that's through Jumpstart, whether that's through Rove One and other organizations across the state that give funding. And that, what we're trying to do is create a very comprehensive program. What we find is that Friends and Family Round doesn't exist. People, when they do win pitch competitions or they win funding or receive funding from investors, they're spending so much of their runway and their burn rate is so much higher because they're just trying to survive, right? And so what we're trying to do is create a program that really gives them a leg up, gives them a lot of wraparound services and support, and do something that really, in order to, as somebody who's been an advocate along with you, Bridget, for so long around inclusive innovation, is really try to help people in the way that they actually need it, and not just try to change policy and try to do things in a way that might only be a Band-Aid on the problem. Because right now what we have is our entrepreneurs are going to places like Chile to get $40,000. Or, you know, when you see the national averages when it comes to a successful black female tech entrepreneur gets an average of around $37,000 to $42,000. That's like nothing. While an unsuccessful white male tech company is getting an average of about 1.2 million. Okay? So how are people supposed to, and if you're using some of that money, if you're that black female tech founder and you're using that money to just, you know, pay your bills every month, then you're not able to put that towards your business and reinvest. So those are some of the things that we're working on, and Cleveland is a great place to do that. One other thing I want to say specifically about Cleveland and what's happening there, that incubator is happening in a very historic black neighborhood called Glenville neighborhood. It's in a building that was built by 8 black doctors who weren't able in the 40s to work at the hospital, so they commissioned this building. So entrepreneurship, black entrepreneurship is built in the spirit of that building. We have 12 one-bedroom units, so it's not like people are sharing rooms. It's an opportunity for them to take mental health and everything into consideration as we try to help them. And so this is on a corridor that the city is working on, this Gold Coast corridor that heads right to the lake. A lot of people don't realize that Cleveland.
Is this Utopia?
This is what Utopia is doing.
This is Aaron's pitch.
Yeah, this is my pitch, but it could be. If you have something you want to do in partner with it, you are welcome to do so. But what I'm talking about is why Cleveland is so important in this ecosystem. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that Cleveland is the second largest philanthropic community in the country, right? And #1 per capita. Why that's important is when you take that philanthropic opportunity, combine it with public and the private sector, as well as the low cost of living, it makes it one of the ripest ecosystems to do business. So with all the resources that the state is putting in, that the city is putting in, this is my pitch more just about Cleveland, but the fact that that's why Utopia is doing this pilot program there. And additionally, Utopia is launching a $20 million pilot fund as well to give that follow-on funding to the entrepreneurs that go through that program.
I have not seen you in a long time, so this update is nice. Very, very good to hear. Delilah Wilson-Scott, who I definitely wasn't sure was going to be able to make it, but when she said yes, I was like, yes, Delilah. So, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Definitely want to join everybody in thanking you, Bridget, Amplify Philly, for having us here. Comcast, of course, calls Philadelphia home, so that's where our headquarters are. So we're excited to be here for sure. I lead community impact, which includes our foundation, several of our sponsorship opportunities, as well as how we think about civic engagement through volunteerism. But when I think about inclusive prosperity, one, I'm glad to see that so many different stakeholders, regardless of what platform you have, are talking about it now in ways they haven't been before. We each bring a very unique perspective to this issue, but you're hearing it more and more often. Angela Glover Blackwell, who many of you know, she's the founder of PolicyLink. She's the first person I really heard talking about it at scale. And one of the things she always says is equity is the best antidote to inequality. And I think all of us are kind of doing something that sort of looks to level that playing field. And at Comcast NBC Universal, we're proud to be in so many diversified businesses, but I think what really stands out for me is what we do through our technology. Most of us understand that technology is this incredible catalyst, this engine for innovation and economic growth, but at the same time, we realize there's uneven access to technology. Period, right? Hands down, and that affects so many other issues. Only 1 in 4 people in the country have access to internet at the home. Most of us take it for granted, but obviously if you're in a lower income community, if you're a person of color, you're disproportionately represented in that population. And access, of course, is just the first point. We always like to think of ourselves as, we're not looking to help create the next future, generation of tech consumers. We want to help people understand how to leverage technology, how to be empowered by technology. This starts with access and having equipment, a solid internet connection, and how you think about sort of accessing resources. But more importantly, how are we thinking about digital skills training? Are we preparing our young people, our adults, people that need to be retrained because the industries have changed and are continuing to change. Now we're training for a mindset as opposed to a very specific credential, and I think that's a different way of thinking about it. We all have to be focused on that if we really think about inclusivity. So I'm proud that we get to be part of that puzzle, but it is constantly changing. And we do think technology is a big factor as it relates to opportunity divide.
But it's changing, but it's also growing in the sense of, like you said, there's so many more efforts talking about it, and there's so many more institutions and stakeholders saying, okay, all right, what are we doing about it? And one of the reasons why I like the concept of the jazz, and just for everyone to know, the jazz is like this East Coast like diversity cluster that really only exists in one area in the world. And I think we've always seen the East Coast as like, we're not Silicon Valley, or what do we call ourselves? We're like Silicon Valley. When Silicon Valley is becoming something, everyone's like, we don't need to do that. Because we're not that. Like, we're so much different, and why are we valuing that difference? And the difference and that specialness is the jazz. It's to be anything you want to be or do anything you want to do, and we have that. And I would love.
I feel like we need some background music.
We do. I told them to play that song.
Give the mic.
Because that's the part that I think we're all now realizing we need to double down on.
And you know, to that point, Bridget, we actually took actually 3 weeks ago, we were on the West Coast, so we did every year for the last couple of years, Washington, D.C. is sort of taking a West Coast mission. So we were in Los Angeles, we were in San Francisco, we were in the Valley, we also went to Portland, and you know, part of that pitch of why we go out there is to talk to companies and you know, sort of understand what they're thinking about. And you know, to your point about this jazz concept, you know, everybody's kind of starting to point on the East Coast. Companies are seeing not just the opportunity that exists, I think, on the East Coast in general, especially along the I-95 corridor, but they're realizing that they can't just be focused on the West Coast. They can't just be headquartered on the West Coast. And so you're seeing this movement, you're seeing this movement east, and you know, it's really, you know, for me, it's always helpful because it makes the job of trying to educate them on the why so much easier, because they're already getting pulled out here. You know, we learned the fact...
Our Super Bowl win helped that.
Exactly. Well, I mean...
We helped to kind of push that East Coast. Our Super Bowl win did. Philly, thank you.
I'll call that a home field advantage. They just make that comment, so very good. But yeah, so it's making it easier for cities on the East Coast to be able to pitch it out west.
Absolutely.
But also, I think it's recognizing our unique assets, right? Yes, we're competing for a lot of the same business, but on our terms. And I think, you know, trying to think about being the next Silicon Valley is really not the way to position it. It's more so thinking about what unique assets do we have and how do we want to bring that together. I do think, too, what's happening is, you know, given the changing demographics, people are becoming more and more aware and recognizing the power of communities of color in general. And I think that's a big shift, right? As opposed to this is sort of, you know, bringing my economic growth numbers down. But if you recognize those communities, again, as assets worth investing in and that can create opportunity, then obviously that positions us better than many other cities across the country.
Absolutely.
And I would just add that when you talk about it from an inclusive innovation opportunity, you know, as we know, the Valley is still not very diverse. And it's definitely not diverse on the founders, it's definitely not diverse on the employee side, and it's definitely not diverse on the venture capital side.
And on the economic side, it's hard to live there, work there, play there, unless you have the money to be there.
So, and I think, you know, no matter, so I don't think this is just for entrepreneurs of color, because I think this is an issue when you talk about the, you know, trying to pay for where you're living. I mean, that's what we're seeing with the younger generation, with millennials, right? They're doing a lot of couch surfing and minimal living, you know, and I think there's a lot of models that we're starting to see come out of that, right? Where people would rather rent out their apartment or a bedroom in their house through Airbnb just to like kind of make rent, right? So I think when you look at the cities on the East Coast, which can still obviously be pretty pricey in some respects, in some ways it's way cheaper than the Valley, but it's also about access, and that's one of the biggest things. Because I think, you know, for me, as an advocate, I talk a lot about how, you know, this is a new civil rights movement. And And I think people don't realize that, because if you don't have the training, if you don't have the digital literacy, if you're not an entrepreneur and have ownership in something, we at some point will be completely left behind.
Absolutely.
So until we see the face of technology kind of shift, and we see more diversity, and that's not going to happen until we have more people at the top, whether it's on the boards of these tech companies, which we see a lot more on the East Coast. You see much more diverse boards, you see much more diverse administrations and around the cities, and who are the mayors, things like that. So one of the other reasons that I relocated to Cleveland and got involved, because it's still one of our very few chocolate cities that we have left. Because yes, Cleveland is more than 50% African American.
Well, all of us are. All of us are.
Well, I'm just saying, like, people don't know that about Cleveland. So I'm just mentioning that because there's, from somebody who's passionate about economic development, it's such a wonderful ecosystem. When you still look at the divide that's happening there, socioeconomically, where just around Jumpstart, Jumpstart is kind of in what's called Midtown of Cleveland. So not just off of downtown, but not quite as far out as the suburbs and where the Cleveland Clinic and so forth are. We have a lot of major international assets in Cleveland. However, just around Midtown, there was the Community Development Corporation for Midtown came and did a presentation, and they were talking about how many major companies are locating there, and all of these employees that it's bringing and so forth. But around the area, 40%, and this is again a really high statistic, 40% of the individuals that live around Midtown are unemployed. 40%. Like, it's just, and so when you have those staggering numbers, like, what are we doing about that? And until we started,
we have it in Philly too. I mean, we have a very large poverty number that we all kind of look at as very, well, it's this cloud, but how do you attack it? I know, Young Will, you want to probably jump in on that too.
Absolutely. Well, because it goes to culture and a cultural shift that's needed. And let's face it, tech culture, Silicon Valley culture, is white male dominated. We know that. Why would we think that culture is the right culture or the right fit for a much more diverse country in our diverse cities? Most of you know, I was here for the EDU conference for the past week, and we were talking about in education how that sort of tech hegemony has infiltrated, all of the progressive education movements. Maker learning is something we've done a lot of research in, and you have, these tech-centered makerspaces being foisted upon different communities without any thought to cultural inclusion. It's like, we want to turn you all into coders and makers. Well, maybe they don't want to be coders and makers. Maybe there are other ways to learn, to educate, and to acquire those skills, but where you have greater cultural inclusion and authenticity. So in our programs, for example, we incorporate things like sports and music and sneaker design in our sort of STEAM and maker efforts to try to include a much broader set of the population. And then one other point I made last week at EDU with regards to education, I think it applies to all of this. Think about what music, I'm a music major, and I have a music background. Most people who know me know that. But think about the world of Western music, think about the world of music without Black culture.
I know.
Without Latin culture. Without Asian culture.
The jazz.
Without jazz. Exactly.
It is.
It is so much richer. It's so much better for all of us. And yet we, right now, in tech entrepreneurship, we are just seeing Mozart.
Right.
Or not even.
You don't see everything else. You don't.
But we should put a fine point on that, because I do think, one of the main tenets of inclusive prosperity is that you're including and engaging resident voice. You're not coming up with solutions in a vacuum. You're talking to key partners on the ground with communities and building solutions together. That's something we always try to do. And yes, it takes longer, it's harder, but you're going to end up with a better product. And that hasn't been the way that investment typically takes place, or philanthropy typically takes place. So you sort of have to start from the point of there's value, which is why we're making investments.
That's one of that. Even for the impact side, people don't see that ROI. It's a longer time to see ROI impact, but you have to. You now have to do it. We have to help solve the social problems that we can.
And I want to just jump in about this workforce development piece, because it's very critical. When you talk about doing all of this economic development, if you don't take a moment and say, like, you can't just create these incubators or these accelerators and these other programs and not bring the community along with
Absolutely.
you, right? And so one of the things that even with Utopia, we're partnering with Bite Back, which is an organization out of DC.
Partnerships,
We're doing a partnership which Bite Back has an amazing program, which takes people who are homeless, who haven't been who are underemployed, and gets them everywhere from turning on a computer all the way up to major certifications and to livable wages. So they literally take from that end of the spectrum to getting people to six-figure jobs. Why that's so critical is that at the end of the day, we can have all these wonderful coding programs, like so in whether it's General Assembly and Flatiron, or in DC in Cleveland we have Tech Elevator and we can code it. But if people don't even know how to or don't have basic digital literacy, which there is an assumption that people can, and there's an assumption that they can afford. So the thing that's great about Bite Back is they do all of that for free, and it's a way, which are oftentimes programs that people go to libraries for.
Can I segue off of something real quick, Erin? Because you said something about the inclusion, and Delilah says it too, and I think it's important because I have to throw this question out, the Amazon effect. Only because, it left New York. It's definitely going to be right in your backyard, Brian. It's one of those entities where, it's not just a tech company. They're not even like the highest on the Fortune 500, but yet they're so much a part of everyday life and everyday living. And I'm just curious, we don't have to talk about the scandal, why it's not in New York anymore, but I'm sure inclusion was a part of that, what they didn't do. So how are we pivoting around that wave? So Comcast is definitely the biggest town, or biggest corporate entity that we have in Philadelphia. But we were trying to get Amazon, and we didn't get it. I don't know how that would have affected it or not, but I'm curious how we're all pivoting around that, being inclusive, for workforce, for tech, for housing, for all the things that wave brings, but we're also trying to also be inclusive in terms of the people. So I'm just curious what we want to say to that, because I can't leave here and not talk about a little bit about Amazon, because Brian is about to be where you are. So I'm curious how you guys are prepping the city for that in a way too.
No pressure. Okay.
Because that's going to be interesting.
Right. It's going to be interesting. The way that we have, I think, thought about this is, how do we use this company to help us address some of the issues, be proactive about things that were already coming, but maybe coming a little bit quicker now that Amazon's going to be there. Washington, D.C. is a growing city, like many East Coast cities. We gain somewhere about 1,000 net new people a month in the District of Columbia. We are a city right now of just over 700,000 people, which makes us bigger than the states of Vermont and Montana, even though we're not a state. But what it means is that we orient and act like one of the most unique city, county, and states in the entire country. We are in the middle of sort of a mega region, which includes Maryland and Virginia, which gets us about 5 million or so people. And so we have not only urban-related challenges, and that's housing, that's transportation, that's workforce development, but we also have regional-related challenges. How people get from Maryland to Virginia to get to work, how people, schools, districts, and where people live at in the diversity of our housing stock. And so for us, when we think about Amazon, what we think about is, does that then, with the potential additional tax revenue that we're going to see, should we double down? We already have the largest housing trust fund for affordable housing per capita in the entire country in Washington, D.C. We locally spend about $100 million every single year on affordable housing, and that's for people, a family of four, that makes about $60,000 a year in the District of Columbia or lower. We spend $100 million on housing for them per year. Should we double down on that? Should we now say that because we know that Amazon will have all kinds of impacts, are there other ways that we can mitigate that? Transportation. I think that's one of the more interesting parts about Amazon is that in talking to them, they're not interested, like most big companies and cities are. They don't rely on cars to get around or to get their employees around. They need to be thinking about microtransit, they need to be thinking about bus, rail service. Washington has the third largest public transportation network in the country. A big shout out to Jeff Maruchin, our Department of Transportation Director here as well. Thank you, Jeff, for joining us. We've got to be caring about how we move people, frankly, en masse, and Amazon cares about that too. And so if we can be thoughtful with some of the resources that they are bringing to help us think about that, we will be better off. The final one that I will say, which, and again, all of these things have nothing to do with Amazon writing a check. I don't know how our partners in Virginia think about this, I believe that Amazon's not going to write a check for anything because they don't really write that many checks, frankly, even in Seattle today. And so for me, this is all about how do I get the revenue or the benefit that their employees who will be spending more in Washington, how do I collect that and then spend it on things that are going to be important for us? And so for us, technology and inclusion is something that we're serious about. Anytime that we talk about a company coming to Washington, D.C. or incentivizing them, we have effectively an agreement that says that they've got to participate in the sort of more inclusion things that we care about. They've got to put money into workforce training. They've got to create their own sort of inclusion track.
Does that happen usually?
I'm sorry?
Does it happen when you...
If you want to get money from the District of Columbia, you have to do it. You have to. You have absolutely no choice. And so, the other thought that we have is with the additional revenues that are going to be coming in here, can we make a larger version of that? Can we actually create something that not just benefits one company or is a track for one company, but can we put sort of effectively an overlay on all the companies that are located in the District of Columbia to care about these principles that we care about?
Right, which is why your plan was so beautifully written and done and executed. Inclusion, I don't think I've seen a city that has that much of a widespread net on building inclusive innovation and getting all the partners and all the people and all the communities involved. So that's why I'm hoping that you're going to need it, because is Chocolate City still Chocolate City, or is that a threat?
Chocolate City is becoming less Chocolate City in every city in the country. Frankly, let's just talk about it. That's the paradox of the browning and the graying of America. The fact that people of color and older people are gravitating to urban centers. But what that means is that theory that I have, so no factual proof behind this. But over the last 30 or 40 years, cities by and large have done two things that I think have been transformational. They have worked on educational issues and they've worked on public safety issues. And those were the reasons why people were leaving cities for many years. But now that they've made those investments, people are coming back into the urban areas. And frankly, the people that are coming back, whether you're Asian, Hispanic, Black, or white, are more affluent. They're better educated. They make more money. And so you're getting that sort of different demographic shift moving back into cities.
But the whole Amazon process just forces cities to think differently about a lot of different things, right? Including Philadelphia.
Absolutely.
As I mentioned, Comcast is proud to call Philly home. We're excited about our new Comcast Technology Center. Hopefully, you guys have seen it. Big shout out to the Lift Labs team. We have our new space there as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
But I think that at the end of the day, people watching what happens in Seattle, things happen a lot faster than they used to. So cities have to think about infrastructure in ways they didn't before. So talent is a piece of that, transportation is a piece of that, how you're investing. And I think, in the past, it's always been excited about having a new employer, and I think cities are definitely asking more questions about that. What do those values look like, and how do they translate into, prosperity for that city? Shared prosperity.
Shared prosperity.
And if I can weigh in, I wasn't involved with the process. I know, Bridget, you were, and certainly John Fry was, in putting together a bid. But I think what the process has revealed is it's a lot about Amazon and how it sees the world, right? And how it saw, its opportunities. We all played Jeff Bezos' game show, great, and now we all feel like, why do we do that? Right? Because they ended up doing the same things that most people thought they would do anyway, and doing a very, very stereotypical, again, tech company-centric kind of view.
Yeah.
Let's go where the concentration is and where we think the tech workers are. I think one of the particularly revealing, I know we got some feedback from Philadelphia saying that they didn't think that we had the tech workforce that they needed. And that's one of the things, the direct things they said. And while we might not have the concentration of that, I think that is an incredibly naive statement to make. And I find that actually quite offensive that they made that statement. And I think that's because they don't see Philadelphia and our workforce community and the great diversity and the cultural opportunities that are there as an asset.
Right.
So to me, that says that no one, and certainly in Philadelphia's case, trying to cater to Amazon or trying to appease them to their needs is not the game here. Right. The game is to use the diversity that we have, the cultural assets that we have to grow new ventures and new businesses right in Philly.
And new workforce, and what that workforce looks like, and what they're historically not used to seeing. And that's, they didn't get the jazz. They just didn't, they didn't get it. Or they didn't think that it was maybe going to be helpful to them, maybe, I'm not sure, but. Erin.
Well, and I think too that, to your point, it is really about a cultural shift, right? And that cultural shift doesn't just happen with workforce, it happened, or in education, it's on a number of levels. But one of the new areas, it really speaks to something that Brian mentioned around the affluent individuals that are coming into these cities. So when you look at some of these cities on the East Coast where we have some of the most affluent, diverse individuals in the country, one of the things that part of this access to capital research that we're doing in Jumpstart is also an effort to create education around how to be accredited investors and how to create diverse angel groups. Because what we found is even looking at angel groups who are investing in tech companies, because that's one of the barriers, is who's the other person on the side of the table and are they willing to invest in you? Because oftentimes they're not investing in your technology, they're not investing in your idea, they're saying,
team.
Yeah, your team, and it's the jockey, right? It's not the horse, it's the jockey. So they're like, do I feel like you're the subject matter expert? Are you the person that I'm willing to bet on that you can make this happen? So one of the things that we're doing is creating a very diverse angel group and the education that will go along with that for individuals who are interested. So whether that's athletes, right? Whether that's high net, because in Cleveland specifically, we have a huge affluent, just much like DC as well, and other areas along the East Coast that have huge affluent African-American entrepreneurs who have been very successful that have not invested in tech. Because
they haven't, because they're old, a lot of them are older black,
and they don't understand the technology.
My father, I don't get it, no. So, and that's something we're trying to also
and it's not a physical, asset that they can tangible, right? You can't say, okay, all right, well, I'm investing in this building, I have something that's in exchange for that, and it's high risk.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, it has great returns. But what we've started to see, because Jumpstart has had a couple of major exits just in the past couple of years. One is Cover My Meds, and then another actually was a company that we were one of the original investors on it, and it was later bought by Ring, and then it was bought by Amazon, right? And so the reason I mention that piece is because of what that brought into the economy as far as individuals. People started to pay attention, like, hey, why wasn't I in on that deal when it came before Jumpstart to invest in? Because and what we looked at is our investing pool was still white male dominated, right? So we're changing that investment pool.
Right, love it. Well, let's throw it to some questions and then we'll continue talking, but if anyone has anything they'd like to ask, Young Blue, Brian, Erin, or Lila, is there a mic around? I don't know if you guys have a mic, but we'll just, oh yeah. Is there a mic, Michelle or Leah? Okay, no? Oh, I think I might have it. Thanks, Kira.
Thank you, this was great. Everybody's contribution is great. My question is for Erin. Thank you for letting us know a little bit more about the work you're doing in Ohio. I think what you're doing or what you want to do with Utopia is raising the bar, so thank you. I'm curious with Utopia, how are you getting funding for that? And then what does success look like for you? So is it during that 12 months? So what does success look like for the entrepreneurs? Is it during the 12 months or will you do something afterwards to follow their journey?
Great question. So again, I started with the fact that we probably wouldn't have been able to create something like that in a number of other cities, but given the philanthropic community in Cleveland, there's a lot of interest in something like this. Additionally, going back to that investor group that I talked about, diverse individuals, it's our advisory board that stepped up and said, hey, we're going to be the original investors in this because we can't continue to ask other people to invest in us if we're not investing ourselves. And we have that support meant a lot because it's like what happens with all entrepreneurs. No one wants to be the first person in, so until you have someone that shows that they're willing to invest in you, and of course it's us investing in ourselves. Additionally, because of the funding in the state and other things that, like I said, there's funding in the state that doesn't exist in other states. And so with that, there's an opportunity to build that fund. We're also going to other organizations to do a fund-to-fund investment as well. And then the second part to your success piece is that, so it's a 24-month program. 6 months of it is the residential, free residential and other components. And then after that, we give you that runway, because what we want to do is create something unique because for every entrepreneur, because every business is different. What we don't want to do, even though they'll be based there, what we don't want to do is say, pigeonhole you and say, you have to stay here. What we want to do is elevate you so that you can go into other programs, we validate you, get you venture ready, right? So that you are able to, so this, for success, the way that we're measuring that is that when they're at an opportunity that they can get additional funding, when they have an opportunity to actually start showing some real scalability and sustainability without living off of pitch funding and what have you, then we know that we've really done something to kind of move the needle. Because what we're seeing now is when what we've seen in the other accelerators that target diverse entrepreneurs across the country, and even in Ohio with Hillman, who's a partner, is partnering with us on this as well, is that they have so much demand into these programs, but what we're not seeing is moving the needle until we start seeing the real, a Black Mark Zuckerberg or whatever. That's real success ultimately for us, is until we start really seeing generational wealth. But in the meantime, we can move the needle by just creating the opportunity in a unique way that supports those entrepreneurs in the way that they need to be supported.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Ryan, sorry to stay with Amazon for a moment, but in addition to revenue, Amazon is going to be hiring. There's going to be a lot of jobs that they're going to be bringing. What are you thinking about in terms of helping to make sure that a lot of those jobs go to DC residents? And part two, what can other large companies that are already in the district do to help prepare DC residents for those kinds of jobs?
So on the first part of your question, we have, shortly after the announcement of Northern Virginia, I met with Holly Sullivan, the Amazon person, and we just talked just about what this means for Washington and best ways that we can be helpful. And one of the things that we sort of came to was universities. Universities are awesome institutional partners, and just like sometimes cities and companies, they don't really talk to each other that much. And so we, Washington, D.C. government, decided to be a bit of a convener for our universities, and so we got the presidents of 6 or 7 universities together, and we said, so this is going to be a great opportunity, and so how can we help you all, turn your curriculum, frankly. That's one of the things we actually heard from Amazon in Washington, D.C. and the region, is that while we're the most educated city in the country, we don't produce a lot of machine learning specialists. We don't produce a lot of UX folks. And so how can the universities help to sort of turn their curriculum to produce people, knowing that there will be this fantastic employer that will be at the end of the spectrum? On what can companies do, and this has been part of the challenge part is I think the companies in Washington D.C. have a role to play with making sure that they are engaging with universities and engaging, frankly, with the government. I don't know if there's necessarily one overriding program or policy that I can direct a company to, but I know that your company, as an example, has been a good partner on both the workforce training side, our WIC side, and just sort of helping direct us to where people can ultimately be employees. Not everybody's going to work at Amazon, and so I more need, and by the way, Amazon is, when you look at our total job sort of bucket in Washington, D.C. and our region, pretty small percentage of that. So I actually care much more about the companies that are located in the region and making sure that that workforce is trained for jobs that your company would provide, as much as I am about necessarily Amazon.
Yeah, I get
because I do think the role of universities is so important in this course. It's talent. Absolutely. And universities aren't known for being the most nimble and fast-moving sort of organizations. So, at least what we have tried to do, in Philadelphia at Drexel, is to start some really programs that I think address that sort of economic development and growth. For one, we're starting a new program we call Transcend, which is about transcendence, interdisciplinary program, transcending those boundaries. It's really what it is. It's almost a master's in making.
Right.
Is what we're trying to start. And there's two reasons for that. Because one, I think that kind of skill is really in demand. Having a technical foundation, but also being able to communicate and collaborate and work in an interdisciplinary environment is so important. The second reason, and this was the one I'm really passionate about, Make Magazine, which is kind of like the face of the maker movement. If you look at all 66 covers of Make Magazine in history, guess how many black people are on the cover of Make Magazine? 0.
Really?
0. In 11 years, it's 0. And it's 85% men and only 50% women, by the way.
Wow.
And so we want to redefine what that means. What that means, and to try to then put those sorts of students and those graduates out into the workforce. And then we think that's going to be the future.
Drexel, come out with a new concept of maker. I like that. I like that. Well, I'm going to throw one last question out that's like a 30-seconder that you guys can just, share however you want. But I just want to say thank you guys again. I think I'm getting the sign to wrap it up. But if there is one more question, you may throw it out. But my question to the panel is, so what does the future of the jazz look like to you for each of your organizations? Is it promising? Is there a future? Chocolate's going local latte. I mean, what is it still going to be there? And how does it look for being part of this new maker, innovation, tech, just new world order that we're about to become? Start with whomever.
I'll just say a quick thing that, to us, it is all about the jazz. It is about the bringing together, the fusion of cultures and ideas and of people, and not letting one type of, there's not one definition of success. There are so many possible pathways, and we hope to be just playing a small convening role in that from our university.
Thank you.
I guess for me, and I try to think about this more regionally or sort of along the East Coast, is there literally is like a streak of lightning from Boston to Atlanta, and every sort of stop along that way has an opportunity to really take what their competitive advantage is and showcase that in a way. And I think that all cities are thinking about this inclusion, whether it's racial, socioeconomic, and so forth. And so that lens, thinking about inclusion for how companies and people, because they're coming to that lightning streak. Like, people are demanding it. And it is up to each and every city and jurisdiction to figure out how to take their competitive advantage and make it work for them.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for being here. Thank you, sir. Mayor?
For me, it's about building a utopia, right? That's why the whole name came up from that. But that utopia is a place where you start to see unicorns of diverse entrepreneurs and their tech companies making these major exits. When we start to get to that point where they have that, they have these companies that the whole workforce in that company is diverse, that whole C-suite is diverse. That to me is the future.
Yes.
When I think of jazz, to Youngwoo's point, there's no one star in jazz, right? And there's a lot of improv. So each of our sectors have to step up, but they definitely have to be empowered by shared vision. So while each of us are bringing different things to the table, I think if we're not sort of making that music together, it's not really going to work well. But we're going to make some mistakes along the way, and I think there has to be room for that. And the community has to be an equal partner in that as well.
So experimenting.
A lot of opportunities.
Absolutely. That's it, folks. They were awesome. Thank you. Definitely Brian, Aaron, and Delilah. Did it, Mike? Oh my God.
Yeah. I'm gonna tell him you should have been there. I'm gonna tell him that you should have been there.
Yeah.